Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast, your guide to the whitetail woods. Presented by First Light, creating proven, versatile hunting apparel for the stand, saddle, or blind. First Light, go farther, stay longer. And now, your host, Mark Kenyon.
Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast. This week on the show, I'm answering your questions on everything from the key traits that the most successful deer hunters share to my take on the top 3 days to be in the whitetail woods and more. All right, welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast, brought to you by First Light and First Light's Spectre whitetail pattern, which, if you don't know, is a part of the Camo for Conservation program. Every purchase of a Spectre piece of gear from First Light or anyone else, a portion of those proceeds go to support the National Deer Association. So good stuff there. As we talked last week, we chatted with Matt Ross from the National Deer Association, and we are on this whole topic about looking back on the last 10 years. This month, we've kind of done this retrospective of sorts. We are 10 seasons deep into the Wired to Hunt podcast. So today, I want to do something that I've never done before. I don't think anything like this has happened over these 10 years, which is that I am doing a completely solo podcast answering your questions. So we're going to do a Q&A style episode, which we have done, but today it's just going to be me. No sidekick, no Dan Johnson, no Tony Peterson, no Spencer Newharth, no Furter, just me and you. And I kind of like this opportunity because this has been a 10-year journey. This has been a 10-year ride between me and you folks listening on your headphones, in the car, on a run, doing the dishes, whatever it is you're doing. We've got to form, some kind of relationship here. I don't want to sound hokey, but I am appreciative of that. This opportunity that I've had to get to know so many of you and to share this thing that I love so much with you. And hopefully you've been able to learn from that, this passion that I've had for deer and deer hunting and the outdoors and learning about all this kind of stuff. Over these last 10 years, my goal has been, and I think anyone who's listened should know this hopefully, has been to take you along this journey with me. From the outset, when I started Wired to Hunt 15 years ago, the thing I had to offer to the world was not that I was an expert. It wasn't that I had all the answers or any of the answers on how to become a great deer hunter or how to do any of this kind of stuff. It was more so this basic premise. The premise was that I love deer and deer hunting and the outdoors, all these kinds of things. And I so badly want to learn more about it. I want to dive into this world. I want to be consumed by it. I want to consume everything I can to be, enriched by it and become better at these things. And I wanted to take you along that journey with me. And we could learn together about all of these things and explore these new ideas and these new people and these new ways of going about this hunting stuff. And that's what I've tried to do in the 15 years of Wired to Hunt and the 10 years of this podcast. That's been the journey. And man, we have come a long ways. For those of you who've listened for a long time, I hope you feel like you've been along for that evolution and that you've grown. I can't speak for you, but I can speak for myself and, kind of reiterate what Dan and I were talking about, a couple weeks ago, which is I feel like I've learned so much. I've learned so many different ideas about deer hunting, about deer, about wild places, conservation of these places and animals. I feel like I'm a totally different person now. And none of that would be possible, I really truly believe, if it weren't for this platform and this opportunity to talk to you guys every week, to share my thoughts, to share my stories, to share my questions, to talk through my ups and downs. I mean, you've heard about some of the lowest points in my outdoor journey. You've heard about some of my best moments. You've heard about my struggles. You've followed along with my peaks and valleys, and together we've been through something. So for all of that, this is a long-winded, typical Mark Kenyon way of getting to a simple statement, which is that I want to say thank you. Thank you so much for being along for this, for for gifting me your attention, which is arguably our most valuable asset, more valuable than money. Time is something we can never get back. It is not a renewable resource. We can't earn more of it. It's here and then it's gone. And over these years, I don't know, this is like 667 regular Wired to Hunt podcast episodes, maybe. Plenty of other, offshoots and mini-series and different things like that. So, we're talking hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours that we've spent together. And so thank you for that and everything that has come from this. I hope it's been as beneficial for you as it has been for me. And I think that's, something that can't be, it can be easily forgotten sometimes. I think at least I can get wrapped up in the, what do we have to get done this week? What are we trying to do this year? What's the new goal? What's the new project? And this kind of retrospective is just a helpful thing to take a step back and look at what we've done, look at this path we've been on, and to appreciate it. So this is me appreciating it, the journey, and you guys. And today, as I mentioned, what I want to do is answer some of your questions, tackle some of the topics that you, the listeners, still have questions about. We've tackled a whole lot over the years when it comes to deer hunting and other outdoor activities, but the questions never end. So that is one nice thing, is that there's no shortage of folks that still want to learn. And I think that's a key thing, is to always be learning. And that's what we try to showcase here on the podcast. So with that said, we've got a whole slew of different questions, lots of great submissions from the audience. We're going to tackle some things that are very core to the podcast. I'm going to take some time to answer a question about the key traits that the best deer hunters in the world share. I want to answer a question about what I think the top 3 days to be in the whitetail woods are. We're going to talk about summer whitetail scouting. Going to answer some questions from new hunters who are just trying to wrap their head around, how do you get started? How do you take all of this new information and drill it down to those core elements I need to start finding deer and, getting my tag on one? Going to answer some questions about, kind of continue on the topic of the podcast a couple months ago about introducing kids to the outdoors. We have a few more specific questions on that topic. A question or two about fishing, just for shits and giggles. We've got some questions about conservation and how we can be more effective, some habitat-related questions, really a little bit of everything. So if you like to hunt, if you like the outdoors, if you're a Wired Hunt listener, this podcast should be right in your wheelhouse. But before we get to the questions, since there's nobody else on the podcast and it's just me, I can kind of do whatever I want here. So I've got a cup of coffee, and I would encourage you, if you are listening to this in the car, maybe, have a cup of coffee or a bottle of water. If you're sitting at home in a safe place, have a cold beverage, have a beer, a whiskey, whatever's appropriate for your age range. And let's kick back and talk through a couple other things too. You're going to hear me take nice, long, drawn-out sips of coffee as I'm going to kind of bask in the luxury of zero pressure, no other people to talk to. I'm kicking it. And I should paint the picture for you, since I have the luxury of doing so. I'm recording this in the office of my cabin out in Idaho. And the office in my cabin is not really an office, it's my garage. I've got a desk and a computer set up down in the garage. It's cold out right now, so I've got like a jacket and a hood on. There's a little electric heater down here that I would usually turn on to stay warm, but my podcast editor frequently yells at me if I have any kind of little white noise kind of thing going on. So when I'm in Michigan, he'll make me turn off my heat, or he'll make me turn off the fan. And when I'm in Idaho, freezing my tail off in the garage, I have to turn off my electric space heater. So this is for you, Hayden. But yeah, I'm drinking coffee, and I want to touch on two things before we get to our questions. One of those things is a quick rundown of an article I wrote over on the Meat Eater website about volunteer opportunities out on public lands. This is something you've heard me talking about this year. I launched the Working for Wildlife Tour. I hope you're familiar with that concept. What I'm hoping to do, and what I know you've heard me say, is we're trying to bring attention to the many different volunteer opportunities that there are out on public land. Places, times when you can get out there on a piece of public and do something good. Clean it up, fix it up, improve the habitat for wildlife, improve access for future hunting opportunities, make these places better for you and your families and your friends and other hunters or anglers who want to take advantage and enjoy these places. So it's a chance to do something good, but it's also a chance to do something fun with other like-minded folks. I can't emphasize that enough. That's what I've been enjoying on my Working for Wildlife Tour events so far, has just been like the good vibes and energy. So I did this article over on the Meat Eater website called The Best Public Land Volunteer Events for Hunters and Anglers This Summer. And what I tried to do is I did a whole bunch of searching online, a whole bunch of looking through various conservation organization websites and databases and random things like that, trying to find a selection of interesting, particularly unique volunteer habitat opportunities this summer that I thought people like you and me would get a kick out of. I want to run you through a few of those events that are coming up because they're coming up quick. There's some cool things on the horizon, and you might want to get involved in them. So you can find this article that has links to each of these event pages and how to register, all that stuff. If you go to the Meat Eater website, or if you just Google, best public land volunteer days for hunters and anglers, something like that, you'll find the piece. So let me give you just a quick rundown of what some of these events are coming up. There is another conservation event with the Michigan United Conservation Clubs group, who I did an event with earlier this year on June 24th, planting native wildflowers and shrubs for turkeys and a number of different other types of wildlife on a 24-acre native prairie restoration project, June 24th. From June 28th to July 2nd is a really cool one. This is a one with Backcountry Hunters and Anglers and their Armed Forces Initiative. They're sponsoring a multi-day backpacking trip into the Bob Marshall Wilderness up there in northern Montana. This is an incredible place. And they're bringing a group of, I think it's like 7 to 10 people, something like that, to work on clearing and maintaining trails. So if you want an opportunity to go into a wild place and do some good stuff, this is it. You're running out of time. It's coming up here in just a couple of weeks. But if you sign up, you can head on out into the Bob, get some really cool experience under your belt, clean up this place, get it ready for future hunters and anglers. Another interesting one. This is another not your usual just one-day project. This is something that is available to participate in between July 1st and October 1st. And this is a project where you can do some citizen science with the National Park Service and the U.S. Forest Service over in Washington State. So if you're on the West Coast, or if you are planning on doing a trip to Mount Rainier National Park or North Cascades National Park this summer, the Park Service and Forest Service are looking for folks to help them capture and identify butterflies and wildflowers in these different ecosystems to help them monitor the health and progress of these species out in these landscapes. So this is a really cool opportunity to do some citizen science and a great excuse to go out into a stunning mountain environment. Check that one out. We've got a Missouri River cleanup in South Dakota on July 12th. And then there's going to be a couple Working for Wildlife Tour events. We mentioned these last week with Matt Ross, so I will not give you too many details on this again. But July 29th up in Idaho. And then we've got September 23rd in Mississippi. And then October 15th, I think it is, in Kentucky. More details about that on the website as well. And then finally, here's a very interesting volunteer opportunity. Catching and eliminating invasive pythons in southern Florida. If you're in Georgia, Florida, Mississippi, Alabama, anywhere down there in the southeast, and you want to go on a hunt of sorts, it's actually going to, really help a lot of species from a conservation perspective. It is a chance to get out there and help knock down this very aggressively growing invasive population of pythons in and around the Florida Everglades region. There's like a contest going on. It's the 2023 Florida Python Challenge going on from August 4th through 13th. and they're looking for volunteers, people to go out there, find these snakes, and I think the words that they use are, gosh, I wish I could find out what the word is. Capture and humanely kill. There's a different word they use for it on their own website. But an opportunity to do some reptile hunting that will help the small mammal species and a number of other critters out there in Florida who are just being gobbled up by these pythons. Speaking of this whole issue, this is a random aside, but there is a podcast called, I think it's called The Wild or something with Chris Morgan. I'm going to find it because it's interesting and it's related to this. And since there's nobody waiting on me, you can take the 5-10 seconds to wait for me to find it. It is called The Wild. Yes, I was right. The Wild with Chris Morgan. And he did a 2-part series on the invasion of the Burmese pythons. So it talked all about this invasive species issue in southern Florida and what people are trying to do to deal with it. One of the things they talk about is the huge number of volunteers they have out there trying to eliminate these snakes to save the ecosystem and all the other critters. So very interesting. If this one catches your eye or your ear, I guess it'd be, check out that podcast to learn more. I think that's it. The Working for Wildlife Tour events, as I mentioned, you can get those details here on that article page or the Working for Wildlife Tour article page on the site as well. Again, get out there, have some fun. I hope to see you at those events, and just want to run you through those specific opportunities coming up because what I always found is that I wanted to do this kind of stuff. I talked about, I got to do more volunteering. I got to get out there and get my hands dirty. But I never, at least I didn't frequently hear about opportunities when I could actually get out there and do it. You had to really work to find these things. So I wanted to try to make that just a little bit easier for you, which is why we took some time today to talk about it. Now, point number 3. I'm a big reader. If you follow me on Instagram, social media, you know that I'm really into reading. I share a monthly recap of the best, or really I recap all the books I've read and then talk about, a few of my favorites. And I thought since we've got a chance to do it, I would plug a couple books that I've read recently here on the podcast, since that's something I don't usually get to do. One of them I just want to reiterate. This is something we talked about a few weeks ago with Steve, but Ranella's new book, Catch a Crayfish, Count the Stars, just came out a few days ago. It's our new kids activity book, published, with from the Meat Eater team and Steve. It breaks down a whole slew of different activities that your kids or any kid could go out there and try to develop outdoor competencies, to have fun in the natural world, to learn to hunt and fish and forage and navigate the wilderness and do all these different things that are foundational in building a young outdoors person. So can't recommend that enough. My kids love it. They've already been testing out and participating in a number of these activities, and it's been a fun thing for the family too. So wanted to mention that. And then secondly, I am almost done with a book that I know I'm going to look back on as one of the most interesting, important books I've read in a while. It's called The Song of the Dodo by David Quammen. And this is a book for anyone who is like a wildlife conservation junkie. So, if that right out the gate doesn't seem your cup of tea, then don't worry. This book isn't for you. No big deal. But if you are like really interested in understanding how wildlife gets to be where it is and what causes wildlife to disappear, and you want a deep understanding of that, this book is for you. This book is a very, very thorough exploration of the evolution and the extinction of species. So how do critters evolve, and what then sends critters to extinction? And it uses this idea of island biogeography, which is the study of biology, the study of life on islands. It uses that as a tool to understand how these things happen everywhere in the world. So the unique thing about islands is that they're just a microcosm of the world. Things happen in isolation there, so it's easier to study, and it's easier to see and it's easier to notice trends in populations because they happen on this smaller piece of land. But the same kinds of concepts, the same trends do happen on the mainland, and we are actually creating islands on the mainland. So if you can imagine, there's an island in Hawaii, let's say, and all sorts of things can happen to populations on islands that can result in the evolution of new species or the extinction. And there has been this, we talked about this spring with Doug Chadwick and a number of other folks. We're in the midst of a disproportionately high rate of extinctions across the world. And this is happening notably very quickly on many islands. Over the last handful of decades, we're losing a lot of species on islands. But then, as I mentioned, we are creating islands here on the mainland by way of habitat destruction and fragmentation. So if you look at something like Yellowstone National Park, 150 years ago, Yellowstone National Park was this big chunk of protected land, but all around it was more open wildlife habitat. It was privately owned. It was ranched. It was, whatever was done with it was logged, but, largely still open wild habitat that critters could use. But now increasingly more and more and more and more houses and buildings and businesses and drilling wells or oil wells and all these different things are built around it, and it's increasingly being surrounded by civilization and effectively becoming an island. And that's happening to parks and forests and wilderness areas and all sorts of things all over the world. We're creating these islands of wildlife habitat surrounded by human habitat. And this book looks to help us understand what that's going to mean for wildlife, for deer, elk, bears, pronghorn, all sorts of species that are effectively being crowded more and more into these islands. What's that going to mean for the next 10, 20, 30 years? And are we going to start seeing these species whittle away and die off? So this book has given me, and this is stuff that I've paid a lot of attention to over the years, this book has given me a profoundly more thorough understanding of how that happens, like the ecological mechanisms of how it happens. So if any of that intrigues you, highly recommend The Song of the Dodo. If not, if that sounds like maybe too much scientific garbly-gook, then yeah, it definitely is a lot of scientific garbly-goop, and it is not for anyone who is not committed to really getting into the nitty-gritty on this stuff. So that is my book spiel for the day. We've covered 22 minutes now, and I haven't answered a single question, but I've talked about books, I've talked about public land volunteering, and I've talked about the podcast in our 10-year journey. And I did not expect this to take so long. So let's get into some questions and answers on the main topics of the day. Let's see here. Coffee break. Okay. Adam asks, how do you use summer trail camera pictures if the patterns change before hunting season? Great question, and it is true, and it's something that if you are relatively new, it's an important concept to make sure you've got locked into your brain. The fact that what deer do in the summer is dramatically different than what they do in the fall. Food sources change, bedding areas change, behaviors change, hunting pressure changes. So when we talk about a deer's pattern, that being like some kind of consistent movement, what they're consistently doing in July and August, when a lot of us like to start scouting with our trail cameras, it's going to be a lot different than what they're doing in October. So I look at my summer trail camera pictures and scouting not as a core piece of hunting intel. Like, it's not going to help me develop an actual hunting strategy, because my hunting season, and I should preface this, it depends on when your hunting season opens. But, in Michigan, my home state, my hunting season doesn't open until October 1st. So July and August patterns are very different than October 1st patterns. If your hunting season opens in late August or early September, like some states do, then your summer pictures can be very helpful. Those patterns can stay consistent through the end of August, through early September. They tend to stick to those general bedding to feeding summer movements for most of that period. It's not till velvet peels off, which can happen somewhere in that first, anywhere in that first maybe 10, 12 days of September. In that ballpark, most bucks in most parts of the country peel their velvet. And then you start getting some relocation happening. Some bucks shift to a fall range. You start seeing food sources change in dramatic fashion in that mid-September window. So you can use your pictures up until that point pretty confidently. But for those of you that start in late September or October, I would approach summer pictures in this way. Number one, it's just getting a general sense of what's the deer herd like in that area. Because even though there will be some deer that move in the fall, what you see in July and August will give you a general census of like, what's the general thing here? What's the quality of deer? Are there a lot of deer? Are there not a lot of deer? Are there a lot of bucks? Are there not a lot of bucks? Are there, does it have a fairly even age class? By that I mean, like, are there mature bucks here? Are there medium-aged bucks? Are there young bucks? Those are the kinds of things that I would like to know when learning a new hunting area. If you have goals related to killing a mature buck or something like that, these summer pictures can go a long ways towards telling you, is that even in the cards in this zone or not? Now, you got to remember, you might have a piece of habitat that has high-quality summer food that might draw mature bucks in July, and then it might not be present, though, in October, so you might lose those deer, or vice versa. You might have a property that does not have high-quality summer food, so you get no good pictures in the summer. But then in the fall, if you were to stick around, there is high-quality, late fall habitat, food, doe habitat, whatever it might be, and those bucks might come cruising through. So don't jump to conclusions too much based off summer pictures. Again, it's giving you a general idea. It's giving you a hint of what's to come. But probably the biggest thing for me is just getting some number of bucks on camera that help me develop a target list of sorts of the bucks that might be around that fall that I'm hoping to hunt that year. And, especially in places that you've hunted year after year, you can start seeing like, okay, this buck is a buck that's back from last year. Like, you can recognize these deer year after year. You can see how they've grown. You can see how, you can start to age, start to get a guess of, okay, last year this deer really looked like a 2-year-old or maybe a 3-year-old. And now looking at him now, he's back again. Okay, I feel pretty confident. Yeah, he's probably 3. So last year was 2. You can start putting together an idea of, is this a buck I want to hunt this year? Is it not? And just, start putting those early pieces together. I would guess, and this depends on how large your property is in your area, but for me, most of the places I hunt are less than 100 acres. And on average, I would say, let's say with that rough area of 100 acres, that maybe 2/3 of the bucks that I have on camera in the summer will still be around in the fall, but I lose about 1/3. By that I mean they shift to a new range in the fall. So that said, though, 50% to 2/3 of the bucks I get on camera will likely still be deer I can hunt that fall. So it is worthwhile to get pictures of them in the summer. It's worthwhile to study, to see how they've grown, to help start to put together an idea of age. And probably the most important part is just confirming that this buck is back around. Because if you're hunting an area where you've hunted in the past, you will hopefully have been kind of putting together data on these deer. By that I mean, recorded all of your sightings of that deer, different encounters you've had with that deer, trail camera pictures of that deer from past years. So going into a new season, I would be thinking, for example, there's a buck I'm hunting this year called the wide nine. And going into this coming hunting season, I've seen him for 3 years. So I have a whole lot of information about where this deer has been in the past, what he's done in the past. So this season, if I get confirmation that he's alive, that all of a sudden changes my plans heading into the year. Because now if I know that the wide nine is alive, if I get some pictures of him in July and August, now I know, okay, the wide nine is back. Now it's like all systems go for operation how to hunt the wide nine. So I'm going to know, okay, based on what I know he did last year, I really need to move this stand and that stand. And based on the fact that he disappeared in November but was back in December, I know that I need to have more of my stands or more of my plans focused around a late season strategy or whatever it is. If you get that confirmation of him being alive leading into the year, it allows you to start to focus your efforts in this kind of way. On the flip side, if you don't run summer pictures and you start doing, your prep and you have no idea if he's back or not, you're all of a sudden maybe wasting your time because maybe he's not back, maybe he's dead, and you're wasting all your efforts putting together the specific plan for him, or vice versa. Maybe there is some other buck that is back that you could have been focusing on, but instead you were just hoping for this one deer that isn't even around anymore. So your summer trail camera pictures can help you prioritize your efforts and start to get that early list of, hey, these are the deer I'm interested in targeting, and this is how I'm going to do it. So this is only relevant, though, if you are, someone who's going to target mature bucks or specific bucks or something like that. You certainly don't have to do that. I guess maybe the last thing worth mentioning is that it is just fun, and maybe I just wasted the last 5 minutes of your time, because really more than anything, summer trail cameras are just fun. It is fun to see what's out there. It's fun to follow along with these deer as they grow their antlers, and you get to see what they're doing this time of year. It's just that time of year when our own excitement is growing. And so to parallel that with getting pictures, the first antlered pictures of the year, that is just exciting. So if for no other reason, do it for a good time. All the rest of this is gravy on top. So that is question number 1. Next question is from Tommy. And he asks, what is it that you think all successful big buck killers have in common? So what are the traits? What do the best deer hunters in the world have in common? It's a great question. It's something I thought a lot about, mostly because we've had the opportunity here on this podcast to talk to many of those best deer hunters in the world. And we've got to talk to so many different folks. And one thing that I think is really important to note is that many of these people do things in wildly different ways. So there's a lot of things that are not consistent. There are a lot of things that they do not have in common. There are people that are really, really, really good at deer hunting that disagree with each other vehemently. Like if you took one of our podcast guests who's killed a lot of deer and another podcast guest who's killed a lot of deer and put them on the podcast together, some of these folks might just sit and argue the whole time about how they think the other person is a knucklehead, okay? So there are people with very divergent ways of doing this stuff. What's nice about being in my position, in your position as the listener, is that we've gotten to hear from all these different people. And we've realized and seen that they're all having success. They're all doing it. And they're doing it in different ways. So I just want to emphasize, you don't have to do it any one way. It's not a black and white thing. It's not a, this person's way or this person's way and you're wrong if you're in the other camp. That's just not true. So, I won't name names, but there's a whole lot of petty arguing in this community, unfortunately, between some of the leaders, I guess, in this space, successful hunters, about who's better or who's doing it right or who doesn't know what they're doing. And I would just like to step in and simply say that it all works. There's many different ways to skin this cat. Let's stop arguing about who's better or who's got the right way or who's dumb or who's not right. Whatever it is, there are many, many, many ways to be a successful deer hunter. Now, all of that said, I do think there are a few common traits that all of these different people with different specific strategies do have in common, like 3 foundational elements. I think one of them is that all of the successful deer hunters that I know, everyone we've had on this podcast that has demonstrated consistent success is always learning. They never stop learning about deer behavior, the habitat. This is a lifelong process. They are always digging in. They are always trying to understand what's going on right now. And a key thing here, why is this happening? This is something Tony and I talked about a couple weeks ago. It is a key question. Always ask why. The best deer hunters in the world are always asking why and trying to answer that question. Anytime you're in the woods and you see something, whether it's a deer sighting or a piece of sign on the ground, like a rub on a tree, a track crossing a creek, a buck running off in the distance out of a brush pile you just walked by, always ask why. Why did this happen? Why was he here? Why did he walk through here? Why did he run away? Why did this work? Why did this not work? Why am I not seeing what I thought I'd see? Why am I seeing more than I thought I'd see? Always, always ask why. Never stop learning. The best deer hunters in the world are constantly doing that. They are constantly digging deeper. They are constantly immersing themselves in this world and trying to understand the underlying questions of why is this happening? How did this come to be? What can I learn from it? That is absolutely essential. Don't ever sit back on your haunches and think you've got it all figured out. Don't kick back and just let stuff happen. If you want to become a better deer hunter, you constantly have to be taking in your surroundings, taking in the situation, and processing it, analyzing it, thinking it through. Deer hunting, and really all hunting, is basically a data collection game and analysis. It's taking in a whole bunch of information and then trying to make the best possible decision based on all that information. That process that underlies all of that is this asking why. What does this mean? Why this? What does that do? How does this work? Ask, search, search, keep on learning. Rule number 1 of being a successful deer hunter, right there. Number 2, and a coffee break here real quick. Number 2, I think all consistent deer hunters have to be adaptable. By that, I mean they have to be able to read the current situation and adjust. I think a lot of subpar deer hunters go into a hunting situation with a plan or with a thing they're going to do, and they just do it. They've got their favorite tree. Well, I'm just going to go to my favorite tree and sit there. Or they've got that blind that they love, and it's comfortable, and it's dry, and they just go and sit that. Or they maybe have this one general idea, which is, hey, got a lot of trail camera pictures of the old mossy horns, and he's always hitting the corn feeder, so I'm hunting the corn feeder, and I'm hunting daylight till dusk for the next 7 days. And, that's going to be what's going to be. The best deer hunters do not do that. The best deer hunters have a plan going into a hunt or going into a season or going into a day, but they also have a plan B, and they also have a plan C and plan D, and they know that every time you go into the woods or every time a hunting season starts or every time you head out on a trip, you have an idea in your head of what might be coming up, and then when you get there on the ground, you then get to see what the actual pieces on the ground are. And you also recognize that those pieces on the ground, the realities you have in front of you, they might change today, tomorrow, in the middle of the hunt or the middle of the season. The best deer hunters in the world constantly are assessing what is the landscape, so what's happening, and how do I adjust to it? What's changing right now? How do I adjust? What's different than I thought it would be? How do I adjust? They are adaptable. They are capable of adjusting to change. This is something, an incredibly useful trait in daily life. The only consistent thing in life is change, right? And I think that's very true in the world of hunting as well. Stuff is fluid. Stuff's changing. Surprises are inevitable. The best deer hunters in the world know how to adjust. They know how to react. They don't get stifled by change. They don't see something new and get paralyzed by it or ignore it and just bullheadedly plunge forward with their original plan. If you want to be consistent, if you want to be successful, you have to be willing to pivot. You have to be willing to climb up in your tree stand in the morning, and then as that morning progresses, see 6, 7, 8, 9 deer all pass on that creek crossing that you didn't think they'd be using that's, 75 yards away from your stand. And you realize, well, crap, I made my guess wrong. They're not using this spot, they're using that spot. The subpar deer hunter stays in that tree stand because it's hard to yank down your set and move to the new place. That takes work and it's inconvenient. The consistently successful deer hunter adjusts based on what they're seeing on the ground. They see deer doing something different than what they thought. All right, I'm going to adapt. Let's pull down my set, move to the place. The best deer hunters of the world will head off on a week-long trip to some public land that they scouted in the spring, and they got to know it well, and they get out there and they're excited because they saw a great sign in the spring, and they start hunting, and then, oh shoot, day 1, there's 2 other trucks there. Day 2, 3 trucks. Day 3, man, I tried this other side of the property. There's people here too. There's people all over the place. The hunting pressure has dramatically changed the deer activity. Do you stick with that plan you made back in the spring? You invested time in scouting it, figuring it out, and man, now it's just not what you thought it was going to be. Subpar deer hunter is going to say, well, I'll just keep doing what I'm comfortable doing. The consistently successful, the elite, the best of the best, the better than the average hunter is going to say, nope, new set of circumstances on the ground. I'm pivoting. I'm going to adapt. I'm going to try something new. I'm going to try a new area. I'm going to think about this in a different kind of way. I'm going to adapt to the realities on the ground. I'm going to analyze this new situation and then figure out what I need to do to find success in this new situation. That is core foundational trait number 2 of those best deer hunters. Last, the best deer hunters in the world, consistently successful deer hunters, all persevere. They are all hard workers. They persist through hard times. They persist through challenges. They persevere through the low points. They get through the valleys to reach those high points. You will not find a good deer hunter out there that I know of that cannot push through and put in the time, the effort, the stick-to-itiveness to actually be out there, to actually put in the time to learn, to actually suffer through whatever challenges there might be that will eventually get you through to the other side where success lives. You have to persevere. You have to be willing to put in the work and the time. It's just non-negotiable. Unless you're not hunting and you're just shooting. If you just want to show up on some outfitter or some preserve or something like that and be carted out to your spot and sit up there and just pull the trigger, sure, you can do that without perseverance. In my book, that's not really hunting. If you want to be a real, successful, out in the real world DIY hunter, you have to be able to push through some crap. You have to be able to weather the inevitable tough times, the bad weather, the early mornings, the long days, the mishaps, the speed bumps. There's a lot of stuff that's going to go wrong. There are going to be a lot of moments where you think, man, I don't know what to do, or I don't know how I managed to screw this up, or I can't believe that I screwed this up for the 10th time, or how come everybody else seems to make this look so easy, but for me, I just can't figure it out. Or maybe you have figured it out, and then today of all days, you get the chance of a lifetime and you blow it. Whatever it is, those best deer hunters push through it. They look at these obstacles and they say, okay, the way is through it. You got to get to the other side of the obstacle to get to the things you want. That is what the most successful deer hunters have in common. They never stop learning. They're always quick to pivot and adapt, and they persevere through the tough stuff. There's a whole lot of other extraneous things around that you can do differently. You can hunt food plots, or you can hunt in a saddle, you can hunt in a ground blind, you can hunt public land or private, you can manage habitat, or you can scout for 75 days, you can use trail cameras or ozonics, you can use scent wicks or no wicks or synthetic base layers or wool base layers, you can do all the scent control in the world, or you can ignore it all and throw it to the wind. Whatever it is you want to do, there are many, 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 many different ways to do this, but you need to always be learning, always be asking why. You have to stay adaptable. You got to be quick on your feet and pivot when you need to, and you need to persevere. You got to push through the swamp to get to the other side. If you can do those 3 things, heck, you might not even need this podcast at this point. You've listened to all the different little ideas, strategies, and tips, and then if you can live those 3 core foundational principles, if you can live those things, you are going to fill your tags. You're going to fill your freezer. You're going to feed your family. Probably going to put some bone in the wall. And that's all I got to say on that. So, question number 2 in the books. Let's move through these a little more quickly. I realize when I'm the one talking, I can be quite long-winded. Justin asked, what are your top 3 days to be in the whitetail woods every year? I am going to answer this question partly from an effectiveness standpoint, partly from a fun standpoint. So number 1, I always want to be out there opening day. So whatever state that is, and we'll just say Michigan, since that's my home state, I want to be out there on October 1st no matter what. Opening day is just so much fun. It's that day you've been looking forward to. You've been dying for the season to kick off, so you can't miss opening day. But number 2, it is, I believe, one of your best chances to kill a deer, because up to this point, as long as you haven't been out there screwing around, mucking it up, spooking the deer. As long as you've left it alone leading to opening day, those deer on opening day should not be too pressured. They should not be caught on to what's happening yet. So they're going to be sticking to their patterns, hopefully still moving in daylight, and still going to be doing stuff that you can take advantage of as a hunter. One of your best chances to catch them unaware. So I will not be missing opening day. And I like, opening night. I don't like to go in the mornings often, at least the places that I don't have great morning locations for early season that don't really risk messing up your evening hunt. So opening evening is like one of my favorite hunts of the entire year. Now after that, I think I'm torn between either giving myself 2 days during the rut or 1 day in peak rut and then 1 day in late season with certain conditions. So I don't know if that is allowed. I'm going to answer the question both ways. So first, if I'm just picking dates, I'm taking October 1st, and then I'm going to take November 1st and November 9th. And so what I'm going for here is maybe November 7th or 8th. November 1st I want, because that's like the rut is just ramping up. The deer are out there seeking, chasing. They're definitely not locked down yet. They shouldn't be locked down yet, but there's a lot of that travel going on. And really October 31st, November 1st, right around there, you're probably still going to have bucks, hanging out in their local areas. So if you know an area, if you know a deer well, you still have a chance of taking advantage of that knowledge you have before bucks start really widely ranging beyond their territory, doing things that are out of character. If you're out there on the 31st of the 1st and you're in a buck's core home range that you know well, there's a good chance he's still there, but he's moving in daylight more. So that's a great opportunity. And then I do want that November 8th, we'll say, I'm going to cut the difference. I'm going to say November 8th. I like that time period because now you're peak rut. Now you're like fully revved. You're almost to when they're all breeding, but you're not quite to lockdown. There's bucks running from all over the place. It's hard to beat that 7th, 8th, 9th time period when you've just got a lot of chaos going on in the woods. Hopefully, if you've got the right weather, if you're in the right zone, near some doe bedding, great time to be in the woods. So those would be the 3 dates. Probably the only exception I would add is like if I could pick, December 24th with like 2 degrees and a foot of fresh snow on the ground. And if I had like an amazing winter food source, like maybe the farmer couldn't, harvest the back 2 acres of beans or something like that. So if I had standing beans and those conditions, that would be an incredible day. I'd want that. George asks, when you're introducing younger kids to hunting, how long do you think is a good length of time out in the woods for those first hunts? And what are some key snacks or activities to bring to keep them occupied when times are slow? So yeah, great question. Something I've been dealing with in recent years here, taking my oldest son out hunting so far. My youngest has not been deer hunting yet, but he was 4 last year. He was really into it. Took him on a lot of hunts. I think we did 8 or 9 days hunting. Some of those days were morning hunts and evening hunts. Some of those days were just evening hunts. But what I found was that, 2 hours was about the max I was shooting for a 4-year-old. And, I was trying to take him in, at least for those evening hunts, like places where I knew we'd be able to see some stuff. So even if there might not be much in range, there was going to be opportunities to see deer. So I wanted to make it like exciting from that perspective. So an hour or 2, making sure he's warm and comfortable, making sure there's a chance to see some critters, and then just trying to keep it fun. So I did bring tons of snacks. Snacks were an absolute critical part of the puzzle. It was like every 20 minutes, maybe less, maybe 15 minutes, it was like some new snack. So I was bringing, granola bars, cookies, little pieces of candy, goldfish, applesauce packets, yogurt packets. I brought a thermos full of hot chocolate. So just lots of stuff like that, not necessarily healthy, but in this case, the thing is like, I want to give him these fun little treats throughout the day, to help, continue that positive association between, going out with dad to do this cool thing, and then you also get to have these fun little treats along the way. Just makes the whole thing a little bit more special, and helps them pass some of that time, in which sitting quietly for 2 hours for a 4-year-old is not easy to do. So food was key. I also brought books, and so I would kind of whisper read to him books on occasion. I let him bring little animal figurines so he could play with his animals down beneath the edge of the blind, different things like that. Brought his own binoculars so he could scan and search. Something I did one day, which was a pretty cool idea, was I have an old camcorder that I don't use much anymore, but he thinks it's really cool to take pictures or videos. And so I gave him this little camcorder to try to video some of the critters we were seeing. And again, that's like giving him a job, giving him like a role. And I think that helps a young child, feel invested in the activity and gives them some ownership, makes it a little bit more exciting. So doing something like that was kind of a cool idea that I think helped. So those are the things that I've done so far. I've tried to avoid, placating them with a screen. On one hunt, I feel like there was one night where I really wanted us to make it to the end of the night, but he was struggling, so I let him watch something on my phone. I felt really guilty about that afterwards. So I've been trying to find, if they can't be fully watching what's going on, having to do something that's still, positive other than some kind of technology. That's just me. I think being out there is better than not being out there. So if you have to bring a little tablet or something, that's could be worse, I certainly think. But I do think there's plenty of options of things to play with, things to do out there in the blind, sitting on the ground, whatever it is. They can keep them engaged and happy and excited without having to resort to that. So can't tell you how much fun that was to have my son out there with me this past year. He's very excited this year to come again, and his younger brother, who's now 3, seems like he wants to come out and join the party. So it's going to be very interesting this year with a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old. Yeah. Let's see here. Next question is from Z Minton. This is a quick aside. He asked me about some fly fishing stuff. What weight rod do I use and for what fish species? So I do love fly fishing. That is my second love after whitetail hunting, and been getting after it pretty hard these recent years. So I primarily use a 5-weight and a 7-weight. So my 5 weights are my all-around, do everything trout rod. So dry fly fishing, nymphing, small streamers, stuff like that. That's like if I'm going to grab any one rod, it's that. I've even used it for panfish and stuff back east. It's effective for a lot of stuff. You could fish for smallmouth. You could fish for all sorts of things. So I've used it for just about all of those small to medium size critters. I do have a couple 7 weights that I have been using for saltwater fishing and big streamer fishing. So if you're fishing, for big browns up in northern Michigan early in the year or late in the fall, and you're just, hucking streamers, a 7-weight is a pretty good option for that. I've also used that fishing down in Florida for saltwater species, snook, and even hooked into a handful of tarpon last year on my 7-weight as well. So those are the 2 that I use the most for those types of species. Question here from Jack. How do you judge a conservation group's effectiveness? It's a really interesting question. And I think there's a couple things you can do. Many organizations put out a report that kind of showcase where their money goes and what their impact has been. So if you are, trying to prioritize where you want to donate your time or your money, your membership dollars, your advocacy efforts, whatever it might be, I certainly think it's a good idea to go and look at their impact report and, read up on the things that they are reporting back to their membership as having done. How do they spend their money? Most organizations, spend a very small amount of their money, or at least the best organizations, spend a small amount of money on their, overhead, like just running their staff and all that kind of stuff. And the vast majority of their funding should go to the resource, should go to, whatever kind of advocacy or education or work on the ground that they're doing. I think it's fair to say most that I can think of as I'm thinking back on these that I've read, probably 90% or more of their funding usually goes to that kind of stuff. I think that's a pretty good benchmark. I would tell you that I look at a conservation group and I look at the impact they have on a couple different fronts. Number one, every different conservation group is going to have a different mission and model of what they're doing, right? There's some groups that are primarily just advocacy. There's some that are primary, on the ground work. There's some that are primarily education. So understanding, what's this organization trying to do, but I want to see like real world impact. There's some groups that talk a lot. I want to see a group that actually leads to changes happening in the world. So I want to see an organization that is doing something that tangibly changes either the landscape of the resource. So an organization that is doing something that I can point to that has helped public lands or wildlife or the protection of wild places on private land. Like, I want to see an organization that is either physically getting people to be out there doing the work, or if not physically, I want them to be an organization that is doing something, whether it's giving money or time or advocating for work that has those things being protected in some way. Secondly, I think, I would judge a conservation group's effectiveness by how, well it can rally public action and support. I don't think many conservation groups that operate in a silo get much done. So if a group just has their staff members doing the work, that's fine. But I would not call that a terribly effective organization. The best conservation organizations are those that can have an effective staff, but then rally a grassroots community to do something together. So, that might be an organization getting a bunch of volunteers to come out and do work on public land. That might be an organization rallying the public to all go and, show up at the Capitol and, hold up signs saying, don't do this or please do this or whatever it might be. It's an organization that can move a larger group of people to make change happen. That is an effective conservation group in my mind. And then I do think that, as part of that, having influence on decision makers. So I want a conservation group. Most all conservation groups have this as part of their mission, that being to influence those people that hold the keys, that hold the purse strings, that hold the gavel, whatever it might be, that have the decision-making power to, influence on a high level. So a conservation group is most effective if it has influence, if it has inroads, if it has the ability to influence a senator to vote positively towards some kind of conservation legislation, or if it has some form of influence on a fish and game commission or a state game agency or, the Forest Service, whatever it is, those most effective organizations are able to throw their weight around, are able to rally their membership to get big decisions made that influence hunting or fishing or wildlife or wild places. So there's a lot of different ways of doing these things. The groups that I support the most and that I think do a really good job of this include organizations like Backcountry Hunters and Anglers, Trout Unlimited, the National Deer Association, the Theodore Roosevelt Conservation Partnership, which is unique in that it's, they're really an organization that rallies a bunch of other organizations and partners together to do this kind of stuff, but they do a very good job of leading in that way. Those are a few of my favorites. There's, no shortage of others. I think Pheasants Forever is another really cool example of an organization that has a strong grassroots community and then does a ton of really good work on the ground. Like their habitat first model, I think, is super strong. RMEF, Turkey, there's a bunch of different, organizations that are doing this thing. So it's a matter of finding, what's your passion, what's your, which one of these resonates with you the most. But I think those three main silos of efforts that I mentioned are what I look at when trying to figure out where do I really want to put my money, time, and energy. All right. Plank asks, what kind of tree is your favorite to put a stand in? It's a great question. And I would say this. My favorite tree to put a stand in is the tree that gives me a close range shot at a spot that should funnel deer into for many different reasons, and that keeps me well covered with safe wind. So that is a perfect tree. That doesn't exist in many situations, and I know that's not exactly what he was asking for. But if I had my druthers, I would have a tree in a location like that, as I mentioned, having lots of cover. So because of that, my favorite kinds of trees are usually like a good oak tree. Oak trees tend to have a lot of branches, so there's a lot of cover up in the tree. They hold their leaves later into the year, so there's a decent chance you're still going to have some leaves up there. And then the bark is not too terribly loud. It's not ripping off the tree. Like some of those hickories and different trees like that, or birch, or certain cottonwoods with like a bajillion dead branches on them. There's certain trees that have sound issues or clearing issues if you want to get that cover. But oak seems to be pretty silent and pretty good for cover. Pine trees, cedar trees, those types can be great for cover as well. And if you have a tree like that you can prep in the off season, that can be great. You can get very, very hidden up in an evergreen tree. The only reason why I would pick an oak over that would be, thinking through a run and gun situation. Because, if I'm going to set up a new set right now, the day I'm hunting, I don't want to have to cut down a lot of limbs. And that's the nice thing about oak trees, is usually it's a just enough cover, but not so much that you have to cut 15 limbs to be able to have a way to climb into the tree and clear out a spot to sit and have a few shooting lanes. It's like that sweet spot. A lot of pine trees, cedars, stuff like that, they tend to be on the other side. So much cover that you have to carve out a path for you to climb up into it and carve out a window for you to sit and see. So great if you can do that in, spring or summer, but on the day of the hunt, not as ideal. So that's why I'm going to pick the oak as my absolute favorite. Schrader asked, in a bar fight, who is your sidekick, Dan Johnson or Tony Peterson? Well, there's no right answer here, because whoever I pick, the other one's going to be pissed. But let's weigh the cost-benefit analysis here. With Dan, Dan's like the bull in the china shop, right? Dan's wild. Dan's big. Dan is boisterous and full of passion. So in a bar fight, those are helpful things to have. That could be good. On the flip side, he might have a little bit of reckless abandon in him, to put it, I guess, nicely. And so, he's probably the one that would start a bar fight, would be the problem here. I think Dan would be the type, like, you're out there, like, he might be the one, and I know for sure he has started bar fights in the past. So, he'd be a good guy to have with you if you're on the receiving end of it, but he's also a risk in starting one. And, I just do feel like he would get this, like, hysteria, like bloodlust, and he'll be just swinging and spinning, and there could be some collateral damage too with Dan. Like, you might get knocked over by him, so that's a risk. So Tony, here's the thing with Tony. Tony is like an assassin, so I think he would be dangerous in certain situations, in that he's very tactical, he's thoughtful, he's smart about what he's doing, and so I think Tony would not start a fight. Tony, though, he's in good shape. Like, he does his thing. So I think, he could be dangerous in a certain situation. The problem with Tony is that I think he's also a flight risk. Like, I think Tony likes to talk a big game sometimes. And he's the class clown, but in a pinch, he's going to be like, I don't really want to be around this. So I don't know. It's a really tough call, and I might just cheat here and say I'd like to have both of them, because they both bring something to the table and they both present some risks. So if we really diversify and have all three of us together, there's a chance. Like, I'm gonna be the mediator and or the thought leader on this. And then Tony's going to be like all right, we need a quick jab in here and then let's get out of here. And then Dan is like, well, if you got to release the pit bull because shit's really hitting the fan, all right, then we unleash Dan and all hell's going to break loose. That's that's my take on this one. And that's all I've got to say on that. Let's see. Brett asks, what is my recommended best First Light kit for winter and fall? So I'll kind of shorten this up and give you like if I could only pick like one kit for, the hunting season in most places, I'd start with like your outer suit, like your outer layer, which I would do the Solitude jacket and bib. That's like the mid-season, the main mid-season piece from First Light. That's going to be something you can wear, with light-based layers underneath it. You could start wearing that in like the 50s or something, like early fall, and you could be okay and comfortable. It's windproof. It's DWR treated. It's super quiet. There's lots of smartly designed pockets. It's got insulation in it, but not so much that you're going to die from heat in the 50s. At the same time, you can wear it right on down to like the most cold stuff. Like I've worn it down to like the single digits basically, and just layer stuff underneath it, and you can wear it. So you can be running it from early fall right through the late season. It's incredibly versatile in that way because it's that outer shell, windproof, good insulation, but not too much. It really works well as a versatile all-around kit. If I was adding some stuff underneath it, I'm a big fan of the Origin hoodie. That would be my main mid-layer piece that you could wear in the early season as well, without the jacket if it's too warm. I'd get some wick base layers as that next-to-body, sweat management system. It's, naturally odor resistant because it's merino wool. It's going to wick away the moisture. It's going to kind of help you moderate the climate inside of your outer shell and suit. So that would be my first set of gear I'd be looking at, would be those things there. If you want late season stuff, if you're trying to layer up to wear your Solitude into the later parts of the year, you could add the Source jacket, which is like the super lightweight, packable, silent, puffy jacket. That would be a piece you could layer underneath. You could layer in the Furnace Long Johns or hoodie, which is a great late season layering piece. Any one of those things would really set you well for a long season. What calls do you bring to the stand? Crundle asks. Well, I always bring a grunt tube. If I can only pick one call, it's going to be a grunt tube. I use the Phelps Beta Pro right now, and that is a great grunt. Really nice, consistent, deep, guttural sound. It's got the rubberized bellow tube, so you can move it, manipulate it with your hand to get different sounds and tones. But whatever brand you choose, I don't care. I like a grunt tube that has a deeper, solid tone. I don't like the crappy, super cheap, flimsy plastic ones that sound like very brrr. I don't want that rattle. I want the brrr, brrr. Give me that. I also want to be able to make a snort wheeze, whether you do that with just your mouth or with a amplifying tube on the side of a grunt tube. This doesn't require you to bring anything extra. It just requires that you know how to make a snort wheeze. The basic sound is that is this very aggressive, flipping the middle finger kind of call to another buck. It's a great call to use during that, anytime during the rutting period of the year. That is a very effective kind of challenge call that can get a mature buck to come your way. So grunt tube is the only thing that I always bring, whether it's early season, late season, rut. I always have my grunt tube. When you get into the rut, I will oftentimes add rattling antlers or a rattling bag if I'm in a relatively low pressure area with high mature buck density. So by that, I mean I don't really rattle ever in southern Michigan because there's not a ton of mature bucks, but there are tons of hunters. I think I can say that. I'm pretty sure that I've never rattled in a buck, a mature buck at least, in Michigan. I've tried early on, and more often than not, I just scared deer. So I've stopped rattling in the super high pressure places I hunt, but I do rattle in those lower pressure places, Iowa, Ohio, the Dakotas, Illinois, those kinds of places. Rattling can be effective. Texas used it effectively down there. So I'll bring that along in those situations. And then a can call, I'll sometimes bring a doe bleat. Honestly, I don't use it a lot, but I will occasionally bring a doe bleat call of one form or another in that, sweet spot of the rut. And I have called in a few bucks with it. One of my second buck, I think, ever, I killed with a can call. So that doe and estrus bleat, can be effective in certain situations. But really, grunt tube, if I only ever had a grunt tube, I'd still be perfectly happy. Let's see what's next. Top 5 pieces of gear for getting your kids outdoors. This is a question from Brent. So top pieces of gear for getting your kids outdoors. It's obviously age dependent, but I'll just tell you for the ages my kids are, right? My kids are 3 and 5 right now. And the items that they enjoy the most and that give them the most enjoyment, the first thing that comes to my mind is a net. A net is just gold for getting kids outside because kids love chasing stuff and trying to catch stuff. And that is like such an easy thing to do almost anywhere. You can be in Massachusetts or Texas or Michigan or Montana. There's something for kids to chase and try to catch with a net. And it helps them engage with the natural world and have fun and feel like they're actively participating in it. And it doesn't require any kind of training, right? It's like you don't need a train to shoot a bow. You don't need a train to shoot a gun. Every kid can use a net. So, my kids have the 2 little nets. They're catching frogs. They're catching minnows. They're catching grasshoppers. They're catching butterflies. They're catching turtles. They're catching snakes. They're chasing everything and just having a blast. So I think right there, nets, that is such a great option. Man, I would tell you that a little kid bow is a great thing because again, you can start really small with those things. They can shoot a suction cup bow in the house or outside, and then as they get older, they can start shooting, a real wheel bow of sorts. There's even tiny compound bows that kids 5, 6 years old can shoot comfortably that adjust down to very low draw weights, and that's a pretty darn safe, pretty fun way for a kid to feel like they're an adult, to feel like they're doing something that mom or dad does. My sons have really gotten a kick out of using their bows. They bring them along our hiking trips, our camping trips, hunting trips, of course. And again, I think it's any time when they can feel like they're a grown-up and they can feel like they're doing the same thing when they're a real participant. That's been great. So getting, a young kid-age bow has been great. And our kids had little bows, the tiniest bows when they're 1 year old. And then at 2 or 3, we got them this little plastic bow with suction cup arrows. And then whenever it turned 4, I think, is when I bought him. It's a Bear Spark bow, I believe is the one he uses right now, which has got a whisker biscuit and a little simple metal sight pin. And he shoots field tip arrows and they can stick in the target. And so he's out there shooting with me. And now I think this year or next year, I'll probably buy one of those small compounds. There's one, I think, from Diamond that I've heard good things about that I want to look into more. So those are a couple options. Trying to think here, what are other pieces of gear for getting your kids outdoor? A simple fishing pole. That's another key thing, not worrying about getting too fancy. Just the simple $5, $10 Walmart kids reel is just, get them out there catching bluegills or little panfish of whatever type in your area, little trout, whatever it is. Man, you can't go wrong with that. We've gotten our kids these cheap binoculars, and that's another fun thing for them. They love, even though I don't know how, I know they don't work terribly well. It's another piece of gear that they feel like, okay, this is like what dad has. He's got binoculars, I've got binoculars. And then they kind of learn how to use them. They can feel like they're a little bit more up close to the animals. They can see stuff. That's been great. So those are, I guess, some items that I think are useful. But maybe as I'm saying this, the big thing I'm thinking about is that the gear doesn't matter that much. It's really the thing, just taking them to these places. The place matters more than the gear. So just getting them outside with you matters more than the tools you bring with you. Because I'll tell you what, I could have all the fanciest toys and stuff and hunting gear or fishing gear or whatever. And if I just sat them down in my garage, they're going to get bored real quick. But if I take them to the creek, if I take them to the mountain, if I take them out into the woods, walking around the fields with me, whether or not I have some piece of gear or not, they're going to find something that's fun. There's so many things out in nature that enthrall kids. You just have to get them out there. So do that, and I think you're well on your way. Oh boy. Let's do one more, and then we're going to wrap it up. And the last question here is, how can you make, this is from Sam, how can we turn more hunters into hunter conservationists? It's a great question, Sam. It's something I think about a lot. And I think it just comes down to a realization for each and every one of us personally, that this thing we love, whether that's hunting, fishing, exploring nature, whatever it is, none of it got here by accident. We didn't just get a pile of whitetails in our area by happenstance. The only reason why we have great deer hunting today is because there were a whole lot of other hunters and anglers and conservationists before us that were willing to stand up for it, that were willing to work for it, that were willing to advocate for it, that were willing to protect it. We will not have these places in the future. We will not have these animals in the future unless we become those people now today that are willing to stand up for it, that are willing to go out of our way, inconvenience ourselves sometimes to advocate, to work, to volunteer, to vote, to do whatever it takes to make sure this stuff is around in the long term. It's on us. I would contend that if you are a hunter, we must be hunter conservationists by default if we want to keep doing this stuff in the future, because it just won't be around. There's so many pressures. There's so many other people, other things going on in the world that are nipping away at these opportunities, that are paving over these places, that are polluting or destroying or whatever. There's so many things going on with wildlife in America and the world that's negative. If we want to have these opportunities and places and animals in the future, we have to be that positive. So that's the message that I need to continue to remind myself. And I think we each as individuals can try to live that ourselves and share that story with others. Remind our dads, our moms, our friends, our uncles at deer camp. Remind folks, say, hey man, I love this opening day deer camp thing we got going on. But guess what? There's this thing going on. It'd be great if all of us could show up and, sign this petition. Or, man, just make sure you know about this issue, because this is going to be pretty important for the future of this piece of public land that we're all hunting here today. If we can start, sharing that with other people, that leads to this larger trend of people starting to recognize what's going on, understand the issues, understand our obligations, and recognize, like, hey, we have this amazing thing. We get to hunt. We get to fish. We get to have these wildlife in these places. Now, what do we need to do to keep them around? Because it's on us. They can't speak for themselves. The animals can't speak for themselves. Nobody else is running from the big cities to come protect this stuff, right? There's all these other things going on in the world. A lot of people trying to make money, trying to do their thing. We are the ones living this. We are the ones living outside. Our lives revolve around it. We got to stand up for it. So it's on us. And that is going to be it for me today. Appreciate you tuning into this podcast. Kind of a random, rambling Q&A episode of sorts. But I enjoyed it. Thanks for being here with me for my morning coffee break, for sticking with me for 10 years now as we've done this podcast. And here's 10 more years, huh? Thanks, guys. And until next time, stay wired to hunt.